I drove in silence, with no music, no thoughts, barely glancing at the signs. The car crept along the empty road like a bead on a long string someone had unwound just for me. The world around me felt blurred, like an old photo left in the rain. Dim streetlights emerged from the fog and disappeared before becoming proper landmarks. Trees stretched along the highway like shadows, and the very air had turned thick and heavy, as if I weren't moving forward but slowly sinking, somewhere. Behind me, my old life was fading like a suitcase forgotten on a train platform. I'd left things I didn't bother to pack, conversations that ended too soon, people I never explained myself to. I didn't know what I would have said even if they'd called. Not that they would. I'd turned off my phone before crossing the state line, and now it lay in the glove box, dead and cold, like the hollow casing of a compass. I didn't need voices or directions or plans. I just wanted to be far enough away that even my memories couldn't keep up. The weather seemed to reflect exactly how I felt. There was no sun, no rain, just a gray sky hanging low and indifferent, like the ceiling in a windowless room. Everything around me, the road, the concrete, the scattered houses and fading signs seemed to exist outside of time, like I had entered a space where clocks had no meaning and days no longer followed each other. Sometimes I felt like I wasn't even breathing in the usual way. The air didn't fill my lungs, it simply floated nearby, cold, indifferent, alien. It wasn't fear or sorrow anymore, more like a washed out feeling. Something burned down to ash, lived through and discarded. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The tears had run out weeks ago, when I woke each morning with the same thought. She was gone, and no one could bring her back. I kept telling myself time would help, that I just had to endure it. But everything inside me had become motionless, like a tree left unwatered for too long. From love, grief, and memory, all that remained was a kind of gray dust I carried in me like an unframed photograph, too fragile to throw away, too painful to look at. One night, sitting in the kitchen of my temporary apartment, surrounded by boxes I never unpacked, I opened my laptop without purpose. I typed into the search bar with no goal. Quiet place, faraway house, no one nearby, like they were spells that could guide me somewhere without voices, without memories, without even myself. Most links led nowhere. Expired listings or dead websites, but one message stayed. No subject, no sender. I clicked without thinking, not because I hoped, but because I didn't have the strength to close it. There was a file attached. An old one, dim icon, no description. I clicked. It loaded slowly, like it wasn't sure if it should open at all. And when the image finally appeared, I saw it, a house, standing alone, 2 stories, wooden, with a sagging porch and a black roof, like something imagined by someone tired of noise. No details, no address, no date, no owner. Just one faded line at the bottom of the screen, like a scratch on old film. Whoever wants to disappear will find the way. And I found it. Without knowing why, I got in the car and drove. I passed through a small town, turned onto a side road, crossed a leaning fence, and finally stopped in front of it. In front of the house that didn't look like property, but like something alive. It didn't seem abandoned, but there was something dreamlike about it, too still, too certain, like it knew I was coming. I got out of the car. A cold wind slid up my sleeves, but I didn't shiver. I felt something strange, almost relief, like I had finally reached a place where no one expected explanations. The house looked at me with empty windows, and I looked back, not with fear, but with a cautious hope. The key was under the mat, just like the file had said. I picked it up, put it in the lock. It turned easily, like the door had only been waiting for my hand. Inside, it didn't smell of dust or damp, it smelled of waiting. The silence that met me wasn't warm or hostile. It was attentive, the kind you feel deep underwater, when you realize you're alone and no one is coming to call you back. I stood there in the entryway and felt something inside me go still. Not from fear, but from a strange sense of belonging. The house was old, but not broken. The kitchen was empty, with 2 mugs on the table, as if someone had just had tea there. In the living room was a chair by the window and a fireplace, long unused. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, 2 empty. The third had an old crib with a soft toy missing its eyes. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there and watched, until I felt the floorboard creak behind me too clearly, too early. Before I even moved, I didn't turn around. I simply whispered to myself, "You're just tired," and I stayed. That night, I woke to silence. The kind that's only audible when everything else is gone. No wind, no dripping, not even my own breath, just a hum inside my skull and the feeling that the house had held its breath. I opened my eyes. The clock read 3:14, a time I remembered too well, the day it all ended. I got up, went to the kitchen, and I saw the mug I couldn't find during the day was sitting on the table, dry, still faintly warm, as if someone had just held it. I froze, breathed in, turned, no one, just my reflection in the window, dim, unfamiliar. Upstairs in the bedroom, the chair now faced the door, not the window. I didn't remember moving it, but I couldn't prove otherwise either. I sat at the edge of the bed, lowered my head, and without thinking, whispered, not aloud, but just enough for the silence to hear me. I just want quiet, for everything to disappear. And maybe it wasn't my imagination. The house seemed to breathe in, softly, carefully, as if it had been waiting for that moment for years. I don't know if I fell asleep again or simply lay there until morning, staring into the darkness where everything seemed just a fraction too close. Was it even morning? When I rose from the bed, the light beyond the windows was murky and dim, like the inside of a blurred aquarium. Not sunlight, not cloud, just a vague veil in which all color lost meaning. I moved through the house without turning on any lights, as if afraid I might wake something that preferred to remain in the shadows. The air was perfectly still, like in a room where the windows hadn't been open for years, but it didn't smell of dust or mildew. It smelled like silence, a thick, viscous kind of silence, the kind you could almost reach out and touch. In the kitchen, everything was just as I'd left it the night before. The mug sat in the same spot, precisely centered, as if someone had measured the exact point. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to disturb anything, as though even a small movement might upset the fragile balance the house still allowed me to exist within. I walked to the living room, sat down in the armchair by the window, wrapped myself in a blanket, and simply watched the dry branches outside sway gently in the wind. I had no sense of time. I didn't care how many hours passed. In this house, everything unfolded in a different system of measurement, by feeling, by breath, by the hue of the walls. Sometimes I heard noises, not loud, not frightening, just wrong. A creak near the door when no one was walking, a faint scratching sound, like claws against wood, occasionally a breath, soft and low, from another room. But whenever I stood and went to check, there was nothing, not just nothing to much nothing, as if the house had swept the air clean in advance, so I wouldn't sense what had been there. Once, I tried to step outside, not because I was scared. I simply wanted to breathe. I put on my coat, picked up the keys, slipped on my shoes, each action deliberate and slow, like a ritual. I opened the front door and stopped. The street was there, or seemed to be. The same trees, the same gravel path, but everything looked distorted, flat, like rush stage scenery. I stepped onto the path, took a few steps forward, inhaled, and realized I couldn't hear a thing. No birds, no wind, not even my own breathing. I turned to look at the house, and for a moment, I didn't recognize it. It stood there, not like a structure, but like a presence. The windows too dark, the walls too close. I stepped back, once, twice, and then I was inside again. I didn't remember coming back in. I didn't recall opening the door. I was just standing in the hallway, coat still on, keys still in hand. The door behind me was closed. I couldn't say with certainty if it had been a dream, but my palms were still cold from the wind. I hung the coat on the hook, and just for a second, I felt like I'd done it before. Like I was repeating movements someone else had made long ago. The feeling didn't pass even into the evening. More and more, I caught myself noticing that rooms seemed just a little different from how they had been that morning. The color of the walls subtly changed. Shadows moved according to no laws of sunlight. In the bedroom, I saw a book on the windowsill, one I hadn't brought, old, with a worn cover. When I touched it, it was warm, as if someone had just been reading it. I didn't open it. I placed it back and walked away. Later, when I decided to take a shower, the water began to flow on its own before I even turned the tap. Not suddenly, just a slow stream, as if the house had anticipated my need. I didn't feel fear. I was too tired to be afraid, and it began to seem more and more like the house was truly listening. Before bed, I stood by the window. Outside, the silence remained, but now it didn't feel harmless. I felt watched. Not from outside, from within, as if the house was watching the world through my eyes. And suddenly, I was afraid, not for myself, but for the possibility that I might no longer be alone. Inside myself, the next day, if it even was the next day, I woke up feeling as though I hadn't been sleeping in a bed, but inside my own body, like a passenger who doesn't steer the car, just observes wherever it's being taken. The room, I opened my eyes and was familiar. Same walls, same armchair by the window, same lamp with its cracked shade, but I couldn't say for certain that I had actually fallen asleep here because the evening had been wiped from my memory, like chalk from a board. I thought I'd gone up the stairs, maybe stood in the kitchen, possibly turned on the kettle. Was there music? Maybe the TV? But none of those details stayed in my mind longer than a few seconds, as if I were trying to catch smoke. And in that smoke, something was hiding, something I could feel on my skin but never quite see. I dressed in silence, without turning on the lights, without opening the curtains, just moving automatically, as if repeating someone else's life, someone who had lived here long before me. In the living room, I noticed the armchair by the window was now angled differently, as if someone had turned it not to look out, but to face the room itself. I started to put it back the way it was, but stopped. The way it was placed now felt intentional. I stepped outside a little later, clutching the ring of keys in my hand, like they were some kind of grounding charm. The door shut behind me effortlessly, almost by itself, although I knew I hadn't closed it hard. Outside, the air was different, dense, sticky, damp, like the air in a greenhouse where nothing has truly breathed for a long time, but everything keeps growing out of pure inertia. I walked along the road, the same direction I thought I'd taken yesterday. But after maybe 10 minutes of walking, I saw it again, the same fence, the same bend in the road, the same rusted trash bin with its peeling paint. I stopped. I looked around and couldn't see the house. But when I turned back, it was standing directly behind me. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just froze. Because at that moment, it wasn't just strange, it was impossible. The house couldn't have moved, or I couldn't have turned around without noticing. I stood there with my mouth closed tight, and my heart thudding up in my throat, like it wanted to crawl out and escape on its own. I tried again, walked all the way to the bend, turned, walked faster this time. I counted my steps, 247, then a turn, then another, and I came out at the backyard of the house. I knew it for certain because there, next to the old stump, with the faded plastic toy, sat my coffee mug, the one I'd left yesterday by accident. It stood there like a beacon, like proof I had already been here. More than once, I tried calling someone. Instinct, habit, desperation. I turned on the phone. The screen lit up, then immediately went black. No error, no sound, as if it had simply died from the very act of me remembering the world beyond these walls. It was then I spoke the words aloud for the first time. I can't get out, and the house responded. It wasn't a noise, not a creak, not a knock. It was a sensation, like the walls had briefly breathed in sync with me. Not wind, not vibration, just the faint impression that the whole structure had relaxed, or smiled, from the inside. I didn't hurry back in. I walked slowly, step by step, feeling like each stair had grown slightly higher. The air inside the house was warm, almost cozy, but in that warmth was something wrong. Not from a heater, not from the sun, like the warmth of a room where too many people had stood too close for too long and had just now left. I sat in the armchair, not by the window, by the wall. It felt safer that way. I closed my eyes, and that's when I heard a sound in the next room, a door opening. I was alone. I was sure of it. I hadn't invited anyone in, but there were footsteps, soft, bare, careful. They stopped, then silence again. I didn't go to check, because suddenly I understood that if I stood up, the door I came through might no longer be the entrance. It might lead to the basement, or to a room I hadn't seen, or to nothing at all. I didn't know how this house was built, and maybe it didn't know either, until I walked in. That night, I locked the bedroom door with the small latch. Not because I believed it would protect me, but because I couldn't not lock it. Because not doing so would feel worse. Because that door never used to creak, and now it did. Because the walls never whispered before, and now sometimes I thought they spoke. I lay beneath the blanket, hands curled under my chin like I used to do as a child, and thought, what if it's not about the house? What if it's me? What if I brought something in with me the first time I stepped through that door? Or what if when something inside me broke, the rest of the world felt it, and this house simply let me in? because I was already what it needed me to be. I woke before dawn, if it could even be called dawn, in that gray, murky light that slid across the walls of the house like seawater against the glass of a sunken ship. The pillow was damp with sweat, though the room held a nearly dead kind of cold, the kind that crept beneath the blanket and clung to the skin like mold in an old cellar. I lay still, listening to the faint creaks of the boards inside the walls, as though the house itself was shifting in its sleep, remembering who it used to be before I came. I didn't want to get up, not from pain or exhaustion, but because of a strange certainty that today would be different. Not in any good way, of course, but in the sense where you know something irreversible is about to begin, and there's no path back to what once was. I slid my hand across the sheet and felt the fabric bunch not from my sleep, but as if someone had lain there beside me, briefly and with weight. I rose slowly, feeling a chill sweep across my legs, though the windows were tightly shut. On the table by the wall lay a note, a thin piece of paper, neatly folded. I had no memory of writing anything the night before, and certainly hadn't left it out. On the paper, in my own handwriting, was a single word: careful. I stared at it for so long that it began to lose all meaning. The letters became alien, as if I were seeing the alphabet for the first time without knowing what it was. I didn't touch the note. I left it there, like a trap, like a marker that this had really happened, that it wasn't just another dream left echoing inside me. When I went downstairs, the corridor held the sense of movement. Not noise, not footsteps, just the impression that something had shifted deeper in the house. A moment before I arrived, I didn't call out. I simply walked, not to the kitchen, not to the living room, but toward where I was certain the storage closet had been, but the closet door was gone. In its place was a long hallway, one that hadn't existed before. The walls were dark, warped, lined with peeling wallpaper, and the air smelled of wet wood and something metallic, like tools or dried blood. I didn't hesitate. I walked forward. Every step felt heavier, as if the floorboards had some give to them, not resting on a foundation but on something alive beneath, something soft, something reaching up toward the soles of my feet. The farther I went, the quieter everything behind me became, as though the house was cutting away the sounds, separating me from the part of it that still resembled the familiar. Finally, I stepped into a room. It was unfamiliar, new, filled with a dull amber glow that didn't come from any lamp. It seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The space was filled with objects: an old dresser, a mirror, a bookshelf with titles I didn't recognize, a chair with a fresh indentation in the cushion, like someone had just stood up. But most importantly, a photograph lay on the floor. I stepped closer and saw that it was me. Not me now, not in this house, but in another room, at a different table. I was holding a cup, staring out the window, and in the reflection of that glass stood a shape, blurred, tall, with twisted arms. It was standing behind me, yet the version of me in the photo didn't notice it. I set the photo down like it was a hot stone. My heart hammered inside my chest like a bird trapped in a box with no exit. On the shelf, I noticed a book, the same one I'd seen in the bedroom. But now it was open, the pages turned on their own, as though someone was reading silently. In the margins were handwritten notes in my own handwriting, but with phrases I didn't recall writing. Don't trust mirrors. Don't follow the scent. They mimic space. I didn't understand what it meant, but each line echoed somewhere deep inside me with a hollow, distant ring. I tried to go back, left the room, turned the corner, and found myself again at the start of the hallway, though now the walls were a different color. I felt it, the loop, the shifting structure of the house, rebuilding itself with every step I took. It didn't want to let go. It was playing. It was learning. And in this game, it already knew more than I ever would. I didn't know how much. Time had passed since I first saw that corridor, with its foreign objects and the scent of oldness that hid something beneath a layer of fragile silence. It felt like everything I was doing now wasn't movement through the house, but a kind of wandering inside myself, inside that part of my consciousness that once stored memories, but now seemed to rewrite them. As though the ink had turned to water and the paper had grown too soft to hold its shape, each room I entered looked like the one before, but never quite the same. The colors shifted, the furniture moved, and sometimes I noticed that the objects, the photographs, the books, the clothes were too personal, as if someone was trying to reconstruct my memories from fragments, guessing their meaning but never fully understanding. Once, I entered the bathroom and saw a handprint on the mirror. It was fresh, foggy, the fingers long and narrow, too high to have been mine. When I blinked, it vanished. But the feeling that someone had been there didn't go away. It clung to me like cold air after a shower, seeping through fabric and bone. I tried to write. I kept notes in an old notebook I'd found in one of the drawers. I wrote down numbers, dates, names though no one called, no one visited, and I hadn't known what day it was for some time. But every time I returned to those pages, they were blank, or the writing had changed, scribbled in some foreign language that felt eerily familiar yet utterly untranslatable. I tried to run, a real attempt with a bag, a coat, and a burst of resolve that came suddenly, like a flare. I laced up my boots, grabbed the keys, opened the front door. But behind, it wasn't the street, not the yard, not even the porch. Behind it was the kitchen, my kitchen, the one where I'd had coffee yesterday morning, the same mug still on the table, the same dripping faucet echoing faintly into silence. I stepped into the kitchen, walked through the hallway, and again found myself in front of the front door. Same handle, same rusted hinges. I turned the key again, and again the kitchen, only now the light was on. I didn't remember turning it on. Each repetition brought a slight change. The walls grew wider, the lamp taller, the mug gone. The house was offering exits, but each one was an illusion. Another loop, another mirror, and then it struck me. This place was never meant to have an exit. This house wasn't built like a house. It was a trap, a shape, a memory, a dream, a structure that couldn't be measured with rulers because it didn't exist in space. It existed in me. I tried to recall how I first saw the listing, how I found the address, but the longer I stared into those memories, the more blurred they became. Who sent the link? How did I know where to go? Why was I so certain the house was real? No answers. Maybe there had never been any. I returned to the bedroom not because it was night, but because there was nowhere else left to go. The bed waited for me untouched. The sheets were smooth, the window open, and in the reflection me, only in the reflection, I was smiling. I stared at her, not recognizing myself. The woman in the mirror tilted her head differently. She held her gaze a little too long. She didn't blink. I stood, watching her, watching myself, and suddenly understood. Maybe I was already inside the reflection. Maybe the real me stayed outside. And this was just the copy, still living in what used to be called a home. Everything was becoming a circle. Repetitions, words, rooms, doors, my voice. Even the thought that I was thinking about it, that too was a repetition. As if someone kept pressing play again and again, hoping that on one of these loops I'd choose differently. But I always return here, to this bed, to this window, to myself in the mirror, to the house that no longer asks whether I want to stay. It knows I'm already here, and I no longer know if I ever wasn't.